time, I call the member for Ballina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to join my colleague, the member for Newtown, who's also our housing spokesperson, to say that it's a very, very sad day. It's National Homelessness Week, and I'm sure that no one on either side of the House could have imagined that this would be the kind of legislation that we would be discussing during National Homelessness Week. I say to the Minister, and I say to the Premier, Mr Speaker, that this was an opportunity, and it's incredibly disheartening and sad that there's such a missed opportunity. I do not understand why the Minister decided to go this way. Why didn't she look at this as an incredible opportunity to really bring attention during National Homelessness Week, or indeed just to bring attention to the issues that are facing vulnerable people who are sleeping rough in this state? Why not be, if you're thinking purely politics here, why did she not think that this was an opportunity to show the compassion of a government, to show solution-focused? But instead, every time I've heard the Minister speak, she has gotten up and she has made excuses. Instead of saying, you know what, you're right, it is a crisis, it is a problem, and we need to work together to find solutions. She could have had that approach with the Lord Mayor. She could have had that approach with the people that are in Martin Place. She could have had that approach with all of us, and instead she chose to use homeless people as a political football and to use this as somehow an example where police powers need to be exercised in this way. The police will have no joy in moving those people on, none whatsoever. It's a disgraceful and horrible thing to be debating in this House. It could have won the hearts and minds of everyone. It could have been an amazing moment, an opportunity. Instead, it's something that I note that no one on the other side, no one is speaking or defending, and that says a lot. And in regional New South Wales, Mr Speaker, of course, similar to Sydney, Byron Bay is, and as the Speaker, Mr Speaker today would know in his area, Byron Bay has, no one can afford to buy in Byron Bay. And in my community, rental affordability, the waiting list for public housing, it is very similar per capita than what we see here in Sydney. And these are real issues, they're nuanced, and no one's pretending that the Minister or the Premier, or indeed the Minister here who's making pot shots at me, no one is pretending that there is a quick fix. What it is the tenor. It's the tenor, and it is the way that this is being spoken about that makes it quite disgraceful. And I know that my national colleagues, I note that there's none of them sitting there. I'm not talking about the Minister, but in general, country people do not think that police moving on homeless people is an appropriate thing. And what has happened to the National Party that they would support this. We strongly oppose this bill. It is heavy-handed and heartless. It's a heartless response to a social problem. In circumstances like this, we know that compassion is always the best response. Lance Priestley, who is known by many as the Mayor of Martin Place, who was here yesterday, you could hardly describe him as a professional activist. And even if there are, he is someone who has experienced homelessness in his own life. And the idea, Mr. Speaker, I get that we're rattling cages. We get that.
I'll ask the government benches to show some respect in this debate, and also ask the member for Ballina to direct her comments through the chair.
Mr. Speaker, we don't quite right. Mr. Speaker, we don't live in a totalitarian regime. We do live in a country where we are allowed to protest. And we do live in a country where, thankfully, we are...
This member of Sydney rises on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, if those opposite have a contribution to make, they can do it by speech, not by interjection and talking over the member.
Really
we have not heard from that other side, but they keep on shouting over at this side.
I'll ask the member for Sydney to resume his seat. I'll call the member of Ballina, but I will remind members of the government this debate is a lot of emotion and passion within it. So I think each member deserves the right to be heard in silence. The member of Ballina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. We don't, as I was saying, we don't live in a country where people are bound and gagged or indeed killed for peacefully protesting. So even if you think cynically that what's going on in Martin Place is purely an activist moment, so what? So what? It still does not justify the response that we're seeing. So in the other place, the Greens will be making amendments to a legislation that we think is a disgrace that it's here. We'll be moving amendments to reduce the penalty that applies to people who may resist having their belongings taken by police from $2,200 down to $220. This is in recognition of the fact that often these belongings are all people have in the world and will often have extreme sentimental value. And quite frankly, someone having over $2,000 to get them back when they're living on the street is a little bit strange to think that that's even possible. We will also, honestly, it's so disheartening to hear people jeering when I'm talking about really basic humanitarianism. So, and women, and in my area, I did a sleep out. I did a sleep out for the homeless in 2014, and I slept in one of the parks in Ballina, and it was really very disturbing. I felt incredibly unsafe, even though obviously I had a home to go to. And that's the message that we hear over and over of how unsafe it is for people sleeping rough. So you guys have to look yourselves in the mirror at night. The fact that you would be jeering at me talking about the vulnerability of paying that kind of money to have your belongings returned. We will also be moving amendments to Section 8(4) of the proposed Act to specify that personal belongings must be returned rather than may be returned. If the intention of this bill is to ensure all possible protections and dignity for people experiencing homelessness, then this basic protection of their property should also be supported by all members of this House, and we encourage the Minister to support that amendment. We will also be proposing an amendment to the bill that creates a 2-year sunset clause on these powers. If this is intended to be a response to the specific circumstances of the tents in Martin Place, then we can assume that all other parties in this place will support this amendment, if it indeed is about this particular tents in Martin Place. We also have an amendment to include the Section 200 LEPRA limitations on the exercise of powers under this Act. These would make it clear that police cannot give a direction in relation to A, an apparently genuine demonstration or protest, or B, a procession, or C, an organised assembly. They are the hallmarks of a democracy, and we want to see them protected. As it currently applies, this Act would authorise police to move on the knitting nanas who visit Martin Place most weeks to raise the issue of coal seam gas in their communities. If the intention is not to prohibit this kind of protest, then these protections must be explicit and they must be put in place. Now, to conclude, Mr. Speaker, it is the City to Surf this Sunday, and we note that the Orange Group will be meeting at 9:30 in Martin Place in Macquarie Street. The cynic might think that the Minister is doing this to make sure that the runners are not seeing what is going on over there. But I say to the Minister, what an incredible opportunity that would have been to have a conversation, a statewide conversation, a national conversation about homelessness during Homelessness Week. Again, a missed opportunity. It is uncomfortable, it is confronting to the eye, and I say to those opposite, I say, look, don't look away, and respond with compassion. This is not a moment for political footballs. This is not a moment. I'm not standing here and using it to condemn the Nationals for having lost their way. I am standing here and saying that to everyone in this House, during National Homelessness Week, this is a very, very sad day. And I know that my constituents will not see this as something that they could ever condone.
Thank you.